Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
Born in Calcutta, Raj Paar didn't drink a drop of wine until he was 20. But he made up for it in no time at all once he moved to the United States, rapidly becoming one of that country's best sommeliers with a legendary palate. In 2009, he began to make his own wine in a serious way and now farms 4.5 hectares in Cambria near San Luis Obispo. Listen to his chat about the concept of balance in wine, his love of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and why he never stops asking questions. Hey Raj, how are you?
I'm great. You?
I'm really good, and it's wonderful to hear your voice after so long. It's been way too long. Where are you?
I'm in a little coastal town in California called Cambria.
I've never heard of it. Where is it?
Well, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like 30 minutes from San Luis Obispo, which is south of us, and then north of us is Big Sur. It's a small town on the coast also.
Oh, Big Sur is beautiful. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful places in California. I've driven past it on Highway 1.
Yeah, so you definitely drove right by Cambria then.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice. but it sounds idyllic, right?
No, it's perfect. I moved here during the pandemic, and it's amazing.
I mean, we got to start with where you're from because it's an unusual story because you were born in Calcutta. Just tell us. I mean, I don't think wine was part of your life growing up, was it?
No, not at all. In Calcutta, my parents, the whole family was all into food, and I had cousins in restaurants, so my entire life was spent in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. Either with my mother, my grandmother, or if I'm in my restaurants with my cousins, and that's how it started. I got into food. Then I went to culinary school in New York, and I had wine. I had wine in England for the first time, actually, in Tunbridge Wells. My uncle lived there.
Tell us, what did you have with your uncle? What did you drink with him?
He drank like Bordeaux. So I don't really remember like what Bordeaux it was, but he was drinking Bordeaux. And then, there was no impactful wine as he drank like whatever Bordeaux he drank. I have no idea.
So it wasn't like a light bulb moment. You thought, hey, love wine. Amazing.
No. It was, I was curious because I'm like, as a kid in India, you're eating grapes all the time. You're like, hang on, these are from grapes? Because, it wasn't like something, and I didn't drink alcohol at all. So I was 20 years old, so I still wasn't drinking. And, and so when I had wine, I'm like, wow, this is interesting from grapes. And
so what did people drink in India in those days? Nothing, or I mean, it's kind of a whiskey culture, is it? Beer a bit?
Whiskey, and my dad drank Johnny Walker Black Label. That was his and so so I had no reference point of wine. And for the first time I had wine, it was like 93. I was in Tunbridge Wells, and I was like, this is fascinating, and that's how it started. And got curious, and then I moved to New York, and there was a wine class in the school. I was in culinary arts in New York, and it was a wine class, and that got me hooked, and I kept just asking questions.
Let's get onto that in a minute, because I want to ask you a little bit more about the Indian wine culture now, because it's changed a lot since you were a kid, isn't it? I mean, there are wineries now, and some half-decent wines, am I right in saying? I mean, certainly some. Stonewall Holland tells me they're good anyway, in MW.
No, there are some really interesting wines, and I think that the best vineyards haven't been planted yet. Yeah. And people are definitely interested. I have a small company in India which imports wine. So we import like Rouleau, Lafon, DRC, Tissot, like all kinds of Gono, Savar. So we have a small portfolio of wines. And before the pandemic, it was, I used to go once a year and do an event. I'm going to go back this year, but I think the wine culture not in Calcutta that much, but in Bombay, it's massive. And in Delhi, it's like, you can go to have a dinner with the collectors there, and they'll bring the most serious bottles, and you're like, whoa, you could be in New York or London or Paris.
But it's interesting you say the best vineyards haven't been planted. Where will they be planted? In the Himalayas, do you think?
I think so. I think the biggest problem with the the vineyards there is the monsoons, you know. I mean, that's a lot of rain to hit the vineyards, and also how warm it is. I think in the Himalayas, that's where the right place. If I was younger, I would go back and do something there, but it's too late.
We're too old.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You said that food was your way in. You know, you studied as a chef in India, New York. I think you did an internship, didn't you, at Raffles in Singapore? I mean, what made you change career paths and thought, I don't want to be a chef. I don't want to do what my uncle did. Your uncle ran restaurants, didn't he?
Yeah. No, my uncle didn't. My cousins in Delhi did, and but I loved restaurants. I loved cooking. I loved eating. Of course, wine. I was too young to drink wine. There was no wine around until I came to the UK. But I think that the culture that deep inside you is always hospitality, because you're like hosting. Like my grandfather used to have these lavish parties, and there was always something about hosting, you know, and then food, and then of course then wine came later.
And your big move really was to Rubicon Restaurant in San Francisco, wasn't it? I mean, how did that come about?
After I finished culinary arts, everyone expected me to be a chef, to be a cook. And I said, no, I wanted to study wine. So I sent like 65 resumes around the country, and everyone returned with a letter. Oh yeah, we want to hire you, but as a line cook. I'm like, no, my letter says I want to be a sommelier. But also at that time in 1996, there were not many sommeliers in the 20s and with no training. So then I applied to Rubicon and they hired me. So I started as a busboy. And then
what does that mean? You just polishing glasses, are you? Or?
Yeah, like clearing dishes and running food, like a back server. And then I became a bar back, then became a front server. And then after that, in 6 months, I became assistant sommelier to Larry Stone. So
you really started at the bottom, didn't you? I mean, that's tough.
Yeah. No, because there was no openings, and no one's going to hire, a 24-year-old with no service industry experience. So, yeah.
And as you said, you started working with Larry Stone, very famous sommelier, and he became a bit of a mentor. I just wonder what he taught you, really.
Oh, everything. He's still my mentor. I would not make any move in my life without checking with Larry. I still speak to him often, and he's the best. I mean, he really taught me how to be a great sommelier, like listening to the guest, and he taught me blind tasting. I mean, he used to come in the middle of service and bring me like a quarter ounce of wine and give it to me. And what is this? And I'm like, oh, this is like 89 Lynch Barge. No, you're wrong. It's 90 Lynch Barge. I'm like, oh. Right. So he was so strict. He would never let you and you're like a lot of blind tasting and then service really fast, and got a chance to meet so many producers and taste, all classic wines. I mean, it was we used to drink all the wines you can't even find anymore, can afford anymore for sure. But back then, as you know, wine was much more easily accessible. These days, it's much harder.
So you had this sort of accelerated education, really. In 6 months, you went from being a busboy clearing tables to suddenly you're identifying L'Ange-Barge, pretty closely to the vintage blind on the floor. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, he got me hooked onto that. And at that, then I was like, you know what? There was one time in my life, I'm like, I will never get a wine wrong. I will never miss a wine, because I was so confident, because I would taste so many wines. And we used to taste, everything from young wine to old wine. And that was something I really kind of focused on, and blind tasting became like, I was obsessed, and I was like, I want everyone blind.
So I just want to know, how does one practice blind tasting? Just doing it, I suppose.
I guess, yeah, doing it, but also like you have to know the classics, but and fortunately the access was there, because the wine list we had 2,000 selections of wine from, the early 1900s and then all the way to young wine. And so, it was, we tasted wine. Of course, every bottle we serve, we tasted before we serve it. And then I used to go for all the tastings in town. I used to go all the time. And we had a group of sommelier friends who got together every Saturday, and we used to start blind tasting around like 11 p.m. till 5 a.m. It was like every Saturday. And that was like just a lot of, and we drank like real wine. It wasn't like we were drinking all the best wines in the world, because that was once a week, like 8-10 friends get together, and we used to do this and end up at breakfast, champagne. Breakfast.
Well, as you said, in those days, we could all afford to drink them. I mean, I remember buying buying 2,000 first growths and thinking, hey, this is, I can afford this. I mean, it was a push, but it wasn't like it is now. I mean, crazy.
Yeah, and also Rubicon and Larry, it was the most important wine restaurant on the West Coast. So we used to have a Pichon vertical from the 1800s. Henri Jaillet had his retirement party at Rubicon. So we had just cases and cases of Jaillet back from 76 to at that time till the early 90s. So, you just had access to a lot of wines, and every time an important winemaker came to town, they all came to say hi to Larry or have dinner or lunch there. So it was really the people I met in 3 years and the wines I tasted were till today is the most important part of my life. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, you went to Fifth Floor. Then you became the wine director for Michael Mina Group in charge of 20 restaurants. And in 2007, and I think this is where I first met you, you helped to set up RN74, named after the road that runs through Burgundy, through the Côte d'Or. Why was that place so revolutionary? I mean, it was a fantastic place to drink wine, wasn't it? I mean, did you know it was great at the time, or just only looking back, you think, God, that was an amazing place?
After working service for so many years at Michael Mina at the time was 2-star Michelin. So it was I was always wearing a suit and a tie my entire life. And I'm like, I want to open a restaurant where we are drinking the greatest wines in the world, but we're wearing jeans and just sneakers, So the whole idea was no tablecloth and just have the best wines, served with delicious, simple food. It was maybe elevated bistro food. And it was amazing because it was also a tough time in the banking world, the finance world. San Francisco, was still, it still is an important financial tech kind of hub. So when we opened in a pretty hard time, and everyone just loved it. They were loving because we had 50 wines by the glass. We had an enormous wine cellar, over 100,000 bottles in the wine cellar, and it was we only priced it. We priced it very affordable.
Yeah, it was fun.
And at the time, it was still, Burgundy was still hasn't reached, whereas now. But slowly after 5 years, we realized that I think we've sold all the cellars to buy the same wine again. We're buying it at twice what we were selling it for. And so we had to change the idea a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, 2002, you wrote a book, which I've got and I've enjoyed very much. You co-wrote it with our mutual friend, great friend, Jordan Mackay, which is called Secrets of the Sommeliers. Now, I'd like to ask you, what's the best of advice you can give to someone dining and drinking in a new restaurant for the first time? How do you get the best out of a sommelier?
I think is to first befriend the sommelier, to connect with the sommelier, because there's many different levels of sommelier. Some people are, but I think that the first thing the guests, what I would do, even when I go to a restaurant and I don't know a sommelier, I'll talk to them and kind of see, explain them what I want and what kind of wine I like, and then see if we connect the same way with it. Because they know everything. The sommelier knows what's in the cellar, some secret bottles, some special bottles. And I think many people might go to a restaurant and not even connect with the sommelier. I think it's important to connect because, they know what's up and they know the food and they know the cellar. So,
and if you get on the wrong side of them, they can give you a pretty shitty bottle of overpriced wine, right?
Yeah. Well, you also have to be a little bit smarter. And that's why, either you connect with them instantly and you hit it off, or if you don't, then you're on your own.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be stuck in the middle.
I mean, I want to ask you from your side, because you're a very good one. You were a very good one. You're not doing it so much anymore. But what makes a really good sommelier and what makes a bad one?
I think there's only one thing, is listening. You listen to your guests, because sometimes when you are a sommelier, you only want to share the wines you like, and you forget that you're here to serve the guest. So listen to the guests, stay humble, and give them what they want.
Yeah.
You can take them on a different way, but you cannot, if they want to have a Cabernet, you can't just give them a Pinot Noir. You can take them maybe towards a richer wine. Say I don't have any Cabernet, maybe I'll take you to, Loire, I'll take you to the Rhone, but you can't tell someone, don't drink Cabernet, drink Gamay. So, you have to kind of, in the end, you got to please the guest.
And is part of being a good sommelier buying? I mean, obviously it's buying wines, but is it searching out and buying wines before they become famous so that they're actually good value? before, as we talk about the stratospheric prices for some of these top wines. Is that part of the job?
100%. To stay ahead of the curve. Don't be an Instagram sommelier. Don't just copy somebody else's, have your own point of view, and then you have to like really cater to what the restaurant you're in, because sometimes you're at a really fancy restaurant and you're having like, simple wine, or you're at a simple restaurant, you have really expensive wine. So you have to kind of have a balanced wine list. You have to train your staff. Very important, because without that, because you are only as good as your peers are, and you have to have a real program. We used to have the most intense training program because the goal was to train everybody to be at your level, and that way it's just seamless. Because if you're busy at a table or you have a day off, you have someone there who knows exactly what's happening. So education is a huge part of being a sommelier. It's not just how good you are, it's how good the people around you are.
It's how good the team is, yeah. I mean, there's something I want to share with you, because I don't know if this annoys you as well. It really annoys me when people overfill my glass, when they keep standing by the table and they keep topping up the glass. I just think, leave me alone. Do you find that?
Oh my God, for sure. I don't like keep filling my glass, because I want to finish the glass or get closer, and because the aromas are different when you're. And I do not like being topped off all the time. No, I sometimes say, "Oh, let's leave the bottle here. I'll take care of it."
I'm glad it pisses you off as well.
Yeah, especially if you're like a restaurant and they take the bottle away and put it in a Gueridon.
Yeah,
and you're like, here, I'm like, okay, so and the food is there.
Yeah.
It's
You want topping up, yeah. I mean, you've mentioned this already, your palate and how you trained it. You're known for having a brilliant palate. You're a very good blind taster. I mean, is it a gift, do you think, or is it expertise you've acquired? I mean, I love that Michelangelo quote. He once said, if people knew how hard I worked to get my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all. And I think any of us who taste for a living and taste well, we've put in a lot of hours, right? But also, I mean, is it a gift? I think it probably is a bit, isn't it?
I think it's a gift, but I practice so hard. I don't talk about it too much because I don't practice that much, but to really think about a wine, because you can have a glass of wine and just knock it back and not think about it. But to really, someone I looked up to, Michael Broadbent, because when I first met him, he always had a notebook and always took notes. And I was like, and from that, when I met him for the first time, I'm like, I'm never going to not take notes. So then you're really kind of putting the wine, you're tasting, and you're using your head, the brain, to put it on writing. And so it's important. It's a gift, plus it's something about memory. You have to, remember, and you don't remember unless you're taking notes.
Yeah, I think, but you do have a smell memory, don't you? I mean, I find that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and of course, as we get older, it gets worse. So, and there's so many wines, and these days, so many wines taste like other wines. For different reasons. And it's really hard nowadays. I mean, I must say, I don't blind taste that much, but either I'm out of practice, or there's so many wines that taste like other wines.
Well, I think that's the problem as well. I remember when I did the Master of Wine, in 2001, it was pretty easy to tell New World from Old World, with a few exceptions. Now, I mean, talking about your Chardonnays, for example, I mean, those could easily Burgundian. In fact, they taste more Burgundian than some things coming out of Chassagne-Montrachet these days, right? I mean, it's tricky, isn't it?
It's really tricky, yeah. No, it really is, and it's fascinating, and
I want to ask you, what's the greatest wine you've ever had? I mean, people ask me that, and my answer is always I've had loads of them. But is there one wine that you thought, God, that's amazing? And the other question, of course, is, were you paying?
Yeah, definitely. So back in the day, when Burgundy was not that expensive, I remember buying a mixed case of DRC 78, and I think I paid like maybe $1,200 for it, of 78 DRCs. There was no Romanée Conti or Montrachet in it. So the wine, which has always been was 78 La Tâche. It was a wine which I've been lucky to enjoy many, many times, and that wine is still my favorite wine. As I mean, it's hard to, we drank old wine back then. Now it's like, you can't find it, definitely can't afford it. No. But that wine definitely changed my life. And that was definitely something, this is first time I had it was probably 20 years ago.
But you've had it several times since. That's the point.
Third time since, I haven't really had it in the last, I don't know, 5 years or so. Because someone, it's good to have friends, and they age wines, and
we all need generous friends with deep cellars, right?
Yeah, but I did buy a 78 La Tâche myself several times.
Yeah.
When it was affordable.
Well, respect, I must say. I mean, let's talk about your winemaking side, because that's the kind of second half of your wine life in a way, isn't it? When did you start to make wine yourself? I mean, you were good friends with lots of winemakers, and were you just sort of playing around and say, "Hey, I'll come and pull a few hoses and maybe make a barrel or two or something"? What happened?
I mean, I definitely, the playing around time was 2004, the first time, till 2008. So that time I was, making some wine with Jim Clendenin and some other friends.
The late Jim Clendenin, great late Jim Clendenin,
the great, the best, the man I miss every day. And so I made some wines with him, and then 2009, Sashi Mormon, my partner, and myself, we started to really kind of try to make the style of wines we make now, and we started in 2009. So that was I think the real vintage. When I would say I started to make wine with a purpose. And
just tell us a bit about Sashi, because he's a winemaker too, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he's taught me everything I know. He's an amazing winemaker and partner and dear friend. And he started at Ojai Vineyards, and then he worked with Stolpman, and then we started Sandy and Domaine de la Côte together. And he is so smart and really innovative in a way, and because he's very flexible. He's not just making wine the same way all the time. He's really creative in the cellar, and it's been an amazing journey with him.
But he's a trained winemaker. I mean, you're not. We've heard your path into wine was a very different one, but why? Into winemaking, right?
No, but he didn't go to school either. He learned on the job. He also went. He was a cook. So we both we both make wine in a way that we are cooking. So we by taste. We're not very analytical. Don't rely on analysis, but we rely on our taste, and that's the common thing. We kind of Yeah.
And I mean, Jim Clendenin was a great cook as well, wasn't he? I mean, it was always good fun to go to his house. There was a party with dozens of bottles on the table, and he was generous and gregarious, but he was also a very good winemaker and had a very acute palate, didn't he? He was a great person to learn from, I think.
Oh, great. And great cook, and always curious, That's one thing about being a winemaker is the day you stop being curious, that's pretty much the end of your learning curve. So he was very curious and always tried different things, and just a great person to learn from.
You said your first proper vintage was sort of 2009. Just tell us a bit about what the prevailing style was in California when you started out. Was it big wine? Had the Parker era sort of come to an end? I mean, I say Parker, but it was kind of Parker and Wine Spectator and others that were backing pretty similar styles of wine, weren't they? Yeah,
in California, there was definitely the predominant style was, big, bold, lots of new barrels, and lots of extraction. So it wasn't like, elegance wasn't the word you'd use for a lot of wines coming out of California in that era. I think it started changing after that, but 2005 till 2010, it was definitely more unctuous and rich and juicy style. Now the style has evolved. There's plenty of wines you can have from California, which are elegant and focus more on balance and acidity and freshness.
Yeah, I mean, because you deliberately set out to do something different, didn't you? It was a kind of counter blast or a counter culture, if you like. I mean, how would you describe the winemaking style that you have with Sashi?
Again, coming back to Jim Clendenin, we definitely kind of modeled our wines with freshness and balance. And so, of course, there are people, Mount Eden, Hansel, Calera, Bon Climat, Cupé. So they were definitely people who are making the style of wines I love. And when we started making wine, our goal was to rely more on freshness and vibrancy. And I spend most of my traveling time in Europe, especially in France. So, I was dear friends with a lot of producers there. So there was definitely, our compasses were set on making wines in the old world style and keeping wines that are fresh and using more whole cluster, using less new barrels, relying all on natural yeast, no fining, no filtration, all that kind of stuff. So it was the impact was definitely from drinking wines from some of the favorite producers.
And those styles are much more common in the old world then, or in Europe really, than they were in California. I mean, I take your point that there were certainly exceptions, and the people that have been making, Hansel, elegant wines for decades. But it was something new, wasn't it? I just wonder, how was it received by important American critics? Did they say this stuff is not ripe?
Yeah, no, it wasn't well received. It was very hard for us to sell wine in California. I remember 2009, 10, all the way to 2015. So you're talking of like good 5, 6 vintages. So that's why we have such a strong presence in Europe. That's why, we export more wine than we sell in the US, but that's because we could sell it in California and the US. So I used to come to London like every other month, and, I used to go, so we sell wine in, so many European countries and in Asia. It's because we couldn't sell. And now, of course, we can sell all in the US, but we don't want to kind of, change what we're doing already. So that's why the European presence is strong.
Was it easier to convince the public than the wine writers, particularly in the States, or not? Or is that unfair?
It was hard. They were like, oh, how come the wines are not, how come they don't taste ripe? And, I don't see any vanilla. This tastes too thin. It has too much acid. So there was a lot of pushback, and it took 6 years to kind of to convince people that no, this is the style we like, and we are not going to change it. So we never changed it. We haven't changed anything in the wines. Of course, a little bit in the vineyard, minor tweaks, but from 2009 to what we do today, it's pretty much the same.
The same thing. I mean, out of this, new style, if you like, or rediscovery of a European style, this movement called Pursuit of Balance was born, and you were very important in that. Just tell us a little bit about how it was born, what it achieved, and why it ended. I think it was a shame that it came to an end in a way.
So I can tell you why it ended. So me and Jasmine Hirsch, she has just started her with her father, and I was starting Sandy, and we were talking about, let's do a tasting of producers who make wine like us. And I started writing names on this back of a napkin at RN74, and we stopped at like 8. And I'm like, that's funny. That's it. So we decided, let's do a tasting. I think the first tasting we were maybe like 14 or 16 producers total. And it was supposed to be a tasting only for the producers. But then we had to go rent glasses, and we had to need a space. We made it a public tasting, and from that day onwards, I got so much hate mail because not being included in this tasting. But this tasting was for us to discuss how can we, promote the style of wines we make, because it was a minority.
And when was that tasting? What year?
That was in 2010, I think.
Yeah, same time. Yeah.
And we did a first tasting in San Francisco, and then there was a lot of people are really excited, but there was a lot of people who are really mad. You're drawing a line in the sand. California is supposed to be ripe and big, and I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be. You can make ripe wine, but you can also make balanced wine. So that's how it started, and it was great. We did events in London, big supporters in London. We did events in Japan. We did events all over the US, and then we saw more and more people kind of accepting the style. And at one point it just became too big, and it was me and Jasmine. It was 2 of us, and we did this it was a non-profit organization. It wasn't like we took money out of the business for ourselves. So we decided to stop it. We it's so much. And now we see there's we started with 16 producers, and now there's we get so many people want to join us, over 50. And we just thought that now it has to, this is too much. It's too much to do. It's
done its job in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. We started something, and this was because people thought that this was some kind of, we had a goal to demonize other people and celebrate. It wasn't that. It was nothing about, it was all about accepting what California has to offer.
Interesting.
And I think it became a little bit too contentious in the end. And I was just tired of
fighting.
Yeah, because it wasn't a war. It was just like friendship. It was like love. It's like vineyards. It's wine.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm not here to like tell someone you do the wrong thing. That's not my job.
Let's talk about vineyards, because you've got your own vineyard now, haven't you? Post pandemic, you've become much more of a vigneron. Just tell us a little bit about the vineyard, and maybe tell us about the other brands you have, just so we understand which different brands and which one comes from your vines.
Yeah. So me and Sashi, we started Sandy in 2009. We planted the vineyards for Domaine de la Côte starting in 2007, and the first one was 2011. They both are focused and based in Lompoc in the Santa Rita Hills on the western part of Santa Barbara County. The style of wines we love, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And then we have an estate up in Oregon in the Eola Hills called Evening Land, based on a vineyard called Seven Springs, a historic vineyard. And so these three are like what we've built starting from 2009. And then the pandemic came along and I didn't know what I was going to do. And we stopped traveling. All of us had different things to deal with. And I had never farmed my own vineyard. And I decided to personally lease this property, which we were working with for Sandy. And then I kind of decided to start grafting different varieties. It's in a small town called Cambria where I live. And I have, of course, we have little Chardonnay Pinot. We have Gamay, Trousseau, Pulsard, Sauvignon, Pink Chardonnay, Mondouse, Granger, Altesse, Jacquer. So we have all kinds of different things. I farmed it alone starting from 2020. I'm going to hire my first person this year to help me. We do regenerative farming, so we have sheep and chickens and dogs, and we have put on an apple orchard. We're going to start growing vegetables, and we have lots of cows in the property. It's 4.5 hectares. The whole property is 450 hectares, but just the vineyards is 4.5. And I'm very happy and stay in one place and learn a whole new part of life. And
what's that brand called?
Field and Farm.
Field and Farm. Fantastic.
Phelan. Phelan. That's the family.
Oh, Field and Farm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the family that moved there in 1851.
Yeah.
And they planted the vineyards. It's all own rooted Pinot Noir, and I grafted above that. And so of course I had to put their name because it's I'm a temporary keeper of the property. But
I like that idea. Yeah,
they've had it for so long. So
and you're basically Savoie, Jura, Burgundy grapes, really, mostly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sounds fun. But let's talk a little bit about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, because they've always been your main focus, haven't they?
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I mean, I was obsessed with. My epiphany wine was 86 Raveron Les Clos. I very early on when I started Rubicon, I started focusing on Burgundy and traveling to Burgundy. And, I have many, many dear friends who have taught me along the way. Jean-Marc Rouleau, who's a mentor and a dear friend, Jeremy Sess, Dujac, a mentor and dear friend. So, drinking wine, spending time in Burgundy definitely kind of got me thinking about wine. And, after years of tasting wine in California, we decided to focus on Santa Rita Hills, which I think is one of the most important and will be in time after we are gone, that it'll be a special place for Chardonnay in the world.
You think it's not recognized as being such already? I
don't think so. I think it's a small appellation and there are still many producers making a different style of wine, but I think in time, I think it will be, because also we are in the South Central Coast, so it's not like being Napa Sonoma is still much more much more well known, and so what we are trying, I think with the help of people around us and even some Burgundians coming to our region and making some wine, there's definitely more interest, but to be recognized. It takes time, and they're not in a rush, but we are happy to be a part of such an amazing place, and the soils are special. The place where it is, when you drive through it, it's definitely unique. It's not just another wine growing region. Santa Rita Hills is
special, isn't it? Yeah.
The soil, have silex, and you have you have some very interesting interesting soils, and it's also like the summers are really cool, and so you can have the acidity. There's we are never worried about acidity. We worry about how much acidity. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, do you think there's less of an inferiority complex vis-a-vis Burgundy in the New World than there was maybe 10 years ago? I mean, can these top wines from the States and New Zealand and Australia and Chile and Argentina, can they compete with Burgundy?
I mean, I never want to disrespect Burgundy. Burgundy is always, on the mantle. But I think other places in the world, Otago and Santa Rita Hills and Sonoma Coast and South Africa. I mean, there's so many places I think are trying to find a niche. And I think if you stay true to place and don't mess with the wine too much, you will find that niche. If you have wines from the Santa Rita Hills, they're salty. They're salty. You don't find that many salty wines in Burgundy. It's different. It's a continental climate. Here's maritime climate. So I think people in parts of, in Patagonia, for example, as Jean-Marc makes wine with Piero, there's many places where you can find an authentic profile. And I think that our goal is to do that where we are, and as and embrace other people, other friends and peers who are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned South Africa, because I'll get killed if I didn't mention South Africa in the Pinot Noir sector. There's some great things coming out of the Hebelada Valley, especially, and Elgin as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, we don't see a lot of it here in California, or maybe we just miss it. But I try, and when I come to London, I always try to find some of the new stuff. It's really, I mean, it's the whole world of wine is at this time, it's the best wines made in the world. And so there's so many exciting wines coming, even from like Chile, Argentina. No, it's just endless. And I think that I just love that the community is getting smaller, and people are kind of, meeting up and traveling and tasting, and people like you have promoted the wines, because it's so easy to just stick with the classics. And that's classics are classics because they've done that for so long. But it's exciting to see things happening outside. Yeah,
I always find it more exciting to do that, because you're discovering new stuff, really. But listen, final question. You're a very busy man, although you're not quite as busy as you were, certainly in terms of travel. Yeah, you're not traveling as much. You're based in a farm. Just tell us what your other interests are outside wine. Do you still like to cook, for example?
I love cooking. I love it. I mean, my big goal of 2023 is to grow all my own vegetables and herbs. And I love, cooking. We eat everything local. We have the oceans right here, so we have great seafood. We have some great farms. I cooked a rabbit yesterday from a farm not far away, and it's just amazing. I love cooking. It's something. Living in a small town, there's not that many restaurants, so cooking is definitely something I look forward to every evening.
And do you miss being a sommelier ever?
No, I go to bed I go to bed at like 9:30, 10 at the latest. So no, I love it. I get 8 hours sleep every night. I wake up early. I work with nature. Yeah, I do not miss working in the restaurant.
It sounds idyllic.
It's perfect.
Fantastic. Listen, it's been great to talk to you. That's a perfect note on which to end, a fantastic note on which to end. Lovely to talk to you, and I hope to see you very soon in London, California, Burgundy, who knows, somewhere around the world over a good bottle of Pinot Noir.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank
you.
See
you, my friend.
Take care.
Fascinating man, Raj, who's made a significant contribution to the wine scenes in California and Oregon. Boy, do I miss RN74. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the viticulturist Prue Henschke from the Eden Valley in Australia. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.